Affirm that the testimony you're about to give before the committee will be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, so help you God.
I do. When I was born here in Washington, my parents were public school teachers. And to express both pride in their heritage and hope for the future, they gave me an African name, Ketanji Onyeka, which they were told means lovely one. My parents taught me that unlike the many barriers that they had had to face growing up, my path was clearer, so that if I worked hard and I believed in myself in America, I could do anything or be anything I wanted to.
Good morning on this Tuesday, March 22nd, 2022, and welcome to another edition of the National Newspaper Publishers Association's Let It Be Known. We are continuing to follow the historic Senate confirmation hearings of Judge Ketanji Brown Jackson, who is poised to become the first African-American woman on the Supreme Court. On day one of the hearings, Judge Jackson looked her opposition in the eye and never flinched. She appeared poised and also understanding that, for the most part, it was nothing more than political theater. Let's discuss this morning with NNPA Capitol Hill reporter and host of the Burke Files podcast, Lauren Burke, Let It Be Known correspondent James Wright of the Washington Informer, and Let It Be Known's chief legal consultant, Robert Tarver of the Tarver law firm in New Jersey. Good morning, everyone.
Good morning.
Good to see you all. Let's jump into it. Look, Lauren, day one. What's your takeaway, and how do you rate day one?
Well, day one went pretty okay. I mean, obviously, it was just an introductory day of all the senators talking. I think I'm old enough to remember when hearings used to just be the ranking member in the chair talking, and then we got right into the hearing. Those days, of course, are gone. So we listened, obviously, to the introductions from the senators. You can tell right away that today, which starts at 9 a.m., is going to be interesting because you can see already that Josh Hawley has brought up some sort of fake scenario about her rulings with regard to any case that has the word sex in it. So what they did was they took 600 cases, they took 600 decisions, and they've decided that she's sentencing under the guidelines for those cases. Well, for all we know, Ketanji Brown Jackson be sentencing under the guidelines for all of her cases. So they've taken 1.16% of her cases and decided that that's what we're going to focus on. That's a really interesting thing because it's a QAnon related strategy in terms of subject matter. This idea that you're not really punishing for sex trafficking. So we can look forward to that ridiculous line of questioning. Lindsey Graham, of course, as you saw, spent most of it whining about the Kavanaugh hearings. I actually thought that he, in a sense, has a point. I thought Kavanaugh was not treated well. I believe in due process. I don't think Kavanaugh should have been treated that way. We did later find out that two of his accusers were effectively fake, brought forward by Michael Avenatti. But that has nothing to do with Ketanji Brown Jackson. So they're just wanting to bring that up because they want to make a campaign ad out of it. You saw that Tom Cotton made a full-on campaign ad during the hearing. They're just taking that video and making a campaign ad out of it. So it was what we expected, and I think it'll be. I frankly think there's going to be some fireworks today, not from Ketanji Jackson, but from some of these senators.
Well, the issue, the elephant in the room, if you will, race, right? That came up. We have, I believe, a clip of Senator Hirona. Is that how you say her name? Hirono. I believe we have that clip now.
That there is broad consensus across the political spectrum that you are an eminently qualified and fair person to serve on the Supreme Court. As former Fourth Circuit Judge Michael Luddick, a George H.W. Bush appointee, said, you are, quote, as highly credentialed and experienced in the law as any nominee in history, end quote. In history, that's over 200 years.
Yeah, and also not heard there, she talked about being highly qualified, accomplished Black woman. She would be a highly qualified, accomplished Black woman serving on the Supreme Court. Attorney Tarver, we know race is always going to be a part of it. Tell us about this proceedings and why race shouldn't be a part of it.
Well, you're not going to hear race very much mentioned in this proceeding at all because everyone wants to keep that on the back burner. But one thing we have to really consider and understand is that this is not a judicial process. This is a political process, and it's a time for politics to shine. So it's not really about her qualifications. It's about where she stands politically and what each side stands to gain from her taking that seat on the Supreme Court. Now, you're talking about race here. Race is always going to be a factor because she stands to be the first Black woman on the Supreme Court. But as you heard the senator say, the Congresswoman say, her qualifications are stellar. So that's not something that anyone's really going to go deeply into because there's a paradox when you look at the qualification of others, when you look at the qualifications of an Amy Coney Barrett, for example, that don't nearly match up to this judge. You're going to see race tangentially touched here, but I don't think either side really wants to deal with the racial aspect of it.
Well, at least two, and we have another clip too, because at least two GOP senators invoked another notable Black jurist during their opening statements Monday, using left-wing resistance to Janice Rogers Brown in 2003. They made the point too that, and I know Ted Cruz was really hitting on this point, that even President Biden, now President Biden, voted against her in 2003, a Black woman. Let's take a look if we have that ready.
Race. Likewise, it's not about race. We will see Democrats in the media suggest that any senator that is skeptical of your nomination, that questions you vigorously, or that dares to vote against you must somehow harbor racial animus. If that were the standard, I would note we are sitting on a committee where multiple members of this committee, the senior Democrats in the committee, happily filibustered Judge Janice Rogers Brown, a very qualified African-American woman nominated to the D.C. Circuit. And they did so precisely because they wanted to prevent Judge Brown from becoming Justice Brown, the first African-American woman. Joe Biden was among the Democrats filibustering the first African-American woman nominated to the D.C. Circuit.
James, you know, we talked about it being a commercial. Ted Cruz, did that sound like a commercial to you? And James, dissect that from your historian. Tell us a little bit about 2003.
That was a commercial, and he is completely wrong. The reason Janice Rogers Brown was rejected was because she was a rigid conservative jurist. Now, it's one thing to be conservative, and that's fine. And you can even be a conservative as a U.S. district judge. But Janice Rogers Brown was being nominated to the D.C. Circuit, which Senator Cruz was right, which is considered a stepping stone by many to the Supreme Court. But Janice Rogers Brown, was a very, very rigid conservative, unreasonable in terms of affirmative action, unreasonable in terms of abortion, unreasonable in terms of search and seizure and things like that. That is the reason why she was rejected. And a lot of Republicans were uncomfortable with her rigid conservatism. And so Ted Cruz is pulling a lot of smoke and mirrors. That's the reason why Janice Rogers Brown did not go forward.
Yeah. So, Lauren, today, day two, you alluded to it earlier. What type of questions will the judge face today? What will they throw at her for the rest of this week?
Well, there seems to be a theme out there of, judicial temperament that really actually means we just want you to decide what we want you to decide and not be thinking on your own. That was a big theme. We don't want you out there thinking on your own, Ketanji. Of course, we didn't hear any of this when Amy Coney Barrett was going through her confirmation process. I suspect that the worst questioner, her toughest questioner is probably going to be Josh Hawley. I suspect that Tom Cotton, given his opening statement, will probably be the second worst. Given his opening statement, I think he's just going to basically play to the camera. And I don't really know what Lindsey Graham is going to do. Lindsey Graham is out there whining about Kavanaugh and wanting to talk about race and dropping Bill Cosby's name. And so I don't know what he's going to do. But what we should expect is some as the show is called, some theatrics. We're going to expect them to be making YouTube videos for their mailing list. I mean, that's what these hearings have become, particularly on House and Senate Judiciary. We've seen hearings with Eric Holder where nobody even talked to Eric Holder. The members were just talking because they're talking to the camera, they're talking to YouTube, and they're talking to the supporters. They're not really actually conducting a hearing. And I suspect we'll see more of that today.
Yeah, Tarver, Attorney Tarver, you've seen many of these processes. In fact, during the Trump administration, we saw 2 of them play out, right?
Yeah.
Generally, it's along political lines here, right? But we also know that this is 50-50 Senate. What I'm looking at is the potential of this being a 50-50 situation where Vice President Kamala Harris would be the tie-breaking vote. And how monumental of a moment would that be to have the first Black vice president swear in the first Black female Supreme Court justice?
Well, that's not a conjectured thought at all, because that is one of the things that may actually happen here. I don't think it will, because I think you'll have at least 1 or 2 Republican senators who are willing to vote for Ms. Jackson. After all, they voted for her before, and little or if anything has changed. But that would be an incredible historic moment to have the first African-American vice president breaking the tie to bring on the first African-American justice. I think it's possible. I'd love to be able to see it. I do want to pick up on one point that was just made. I think the area that's going to be looked at today is they're going to pick apart some of her specific decisions. That's all they can do at this point, because you can't really mess with her qualifications. There are some decisions in which they've suggested that she's gone below the sentencing guidelines and has given people less sentences than they deserve. One of the things that you should understand, your viewers should understand, is simply this. When you talk about sentencing guidelines, that's exactly what they are. And the Supreme Court task force itself said you did not get married to sentencing guidelines. In individual cases, you should look to go either below and in some cases above. So those are really, as we call them, red herrings, just things that are thrown out to try to get someone caught up on something and to create a groundswell to basically take you off track. And here's what they want to do. They want to get an issue that they think can create some real saliency, some real resonance with the general public, so that everyone's talking about this one issue, and it may sway certain people in a certain direction. When I say certain people, I'm talking about certain senators.
Well, I want to, let me go to James first, and I'm going to go back to Lauren on the Josh Hawley situation. But James, do you see a scenario in which she does not get confirmed?
No, I don't see any scenario where she does not get confirmed. At the least, it'll be what you all were just talking about with the 50 Democrats and the independent plus Vice President Harris casting the deciding vote. But what's going to happen is just as what Attorney Tarver said, you may have a Susan Collins or Lisa Murkowski or even a Tom Tillis. If you listen to Tom Tillis' statement, he seemed like, well, I haven't made up my mind on you. And that's pretty good. Even Mitch McConnell, God bless his soul, has not really come out against her yet. So I think I don't think your scenario in terms of 50+1 is going to take place. She's going to get some Republican votes.
Well, Bobby Henry writes in that, do you think that they would allow history to be made twice by Black folk and Black women at that? Well, here's the thing that they would not be able to avoid if she's confirmed. Guess who may be swearing her in? That none other than Vice President Kamala Harris. So in one way or the other, we're probably going to see more history after her nomination. But Lauren, you mentioned Josh Hawley. We know where he is coming from. With this wow stuff. How is Judge Brown Jackson going to respond? How do you think she's going to respond? Lauren, I think you're muted.
Sorry about that. I suspect that her sentencing is probably consistent of across 600 cases, And what Josh Hawley's staff did was just picked out the ones with the word sex in it and decided, oh, okay, that's under, but they're probably all under. And by the way, the cases that have anything to do with sex crimes is like 1.6% of her cases. The thing that he's trying to do is the typical thing they're always trying to do with Black jurists. They're trying to say that they're soft on crime, because the underlying racist argument there is that you Black people are involved in the criminal justice system, so you're saving each other through being soft on crime from the bench. That's what he really wants to say. I'm not sure why it doesn't say it. There's really only 2 Republicans, by the way, that I can think of that's going to vote for this nomination. That would be Lisa Murkowski and Susan Collins. Yes, Lindsey Graham did vote for her for the circuit, for the DC circuit, but all of a sudden now Lindsey Graham is suddenly now had this conversion. I'm not sure why anybody else up there is trying to pretend that they're actually weighing this. I did hear Tom Tillis yesterday, and I was like, okay, this is all play acting. I think they're going to vote against her. I mean, I just don't think they're going to vote for her. The brand of the Republican Party is to vote against anything Black, period. And that's why you hear Marsha Blackburn sitting up there talking about the 1619 Project and CRT. What does Judge Ketanji Brown Jackson have anything to do with the 1619 Project and CRT? So
right.
That is just out there. We're just throwing that out there for our, fans. I mean, that has nothing to do with her. She's not made some decision related to the 1619 Project. I mean, it's just ridiculous. So, but to get back to your point about Josh Hawley, that's just to say that Black people are soft on crime and Black jurists are soft on crime. The irony here is that she's more of a Stephen Breyer jurist than a Thurgood Marshall jurist or Sherilyn Ifill jurist. She's actually a little bit more conservative than people think. I know they've got to act like they don't like her because she's Black and we got to say she's radical. But if you actually look at her cases, she's got an ICE case in particular with regard to immigration, which is pretty doggone conservative, which is basically lock them up and throw away the key. So nobody wants to talk about that. But the Republicans want to be Republicans. So here we are.
Yeah, I think it was Lindsey Graham who invoked the Judge Chavis yesterday, and Attorney Tarver, how it just seemed inappropriate.
Yeah, well, you're going to see a lot of inappropriate behavior that goes on over the next couple of days, I suspect, and that's nothing new. They believe in a number of ways, some of these people, that they have a score to settle with Brett Kavanaugh. But keep in mind, the Comey Barrett nomination went through relatively smoothly. The Gorsuch nomination went through relatively smoothly. And the reason why is because none of those individuals had individual accusers who came forward and accused them of misconduct. And now, also, you got to remember, Brett Kavanaugh was not only accused of misconduct, but a lot of things came out in that diary that he had written, which was evidence against himself, his own evidence, with regard to his conduct. Here, you don't have accusers. And so they're going to have to create a scenario that is a legal scenario because you don't have an outside one. Same thing with Clarence Thomas. You had an outside scenario that emerged and caused it to be a sideshow of sorts. So you got to we really have to differentiate these types of situations and not try to lump them all together, because there were really some real questions with regard to Mr. Kavanaugh. Even if they went too far, there were some real questions.
Yeah, James, I want to, before we have another clip of the judge, but before we get to that, I want to ask this question. Attorney Tarver mentioned Judge Clarence Thomas. He is apparently a little bit more ill than what they've let on. Does that add to this this political theater that we're seeing, that they're trying to circle the wagons a bit and trying to, if not stop this nomination, to make sure that if something were to happen, if Justice Thomas were to pass away, that any future nominee by President Biden would not go through? Is this a setup for something like that?
Well, apparently, Stacey, you and I have some inside information in terms of that, and I don't want to get too involved in terms of that, but let me say this. There are Republicans who are very concerned about that, Biden having a second pick. And I do square with what you're saying, because they're now concerned that they may, Biden will have a second pick. That person will be progressive / moderate, and they can't do anything about it right now because the Republicans do not have the majority of the U.S. Senate. And so they're trying to come up with a strategy in order to combat this. These are very interesting times.
Yeah. Lauren, have you heard any more on Judge Thomas?
I haven't heard anything on Judge Thomas, but I haven't tried to investigate that whatsoever. I just want to comment a little bit on what Attorney Tarver said with regard to Brett Kavanaugh. While I think that certainly sexual violence is a very important issue that should be dealt with, we should remember two things. One is that the state of play done on Judge Kavanaugh is not something that should have been played out in that forum at that time. He had come up for the DC Circuit Court of Appeals. If somebody wanted to investigate his conduct as a teenager, as a young 20-something, they had plenty of time to do it. That sure as hell looked like an attempt to throw something into the newspaper to get him to withdraw his nomination. And given the attorneys involved and their patterns of behavior, I would say that's exactly what it was. Certainly, if that happened today to Judge Ketanji Brown Jackson, we would be not so happy about that. If some allegation came out of nowhere, and oh, there's some psychiatrist notes from the 1990s or the 2000s, we would question that. And I think we should question that. These are serious matters. And now the state of play with these matters is to throw them out on Twitter and throw them out on Facebook or throw it into the newspaper and see if the person can navigate those waters. When, you know, we know historically that that was the state of play back in the 1800s and the early 1900s when it comes to Black men. So I don't like it. I didn't like it when we're talking about the 1800s, and I don't like it when we're talking about Brett Kavanaugh. We basically found out. We found out that Julie Swetnick was a fictitious actor in that moment. That's what Lindsey Graham is whining about. I don't necessarily think that Lindsey Graham should be whining about it when Ketanji Brown Jackson is sitting at the table. She has nothing to do with any of it, like literally none of it. So that's what makes it sort of ridiculous. The idea that any Republican would lecture this country on political tactics is ridiculous in itself. But at the same time, you know, these serious matters that we see get thrown out onto Instagram and Twitter, and we saw it with Chris Brown and Deshaun Watson, where the same attorneys keep popping up asking for $20 million to get these guys to pay a settlement so that attorney can get 30% of that. There's a pattern there. And that pattern is starting to become focused only on Black male millionaires and successful Black men in this country. And I don't think you can deny it. It's right in front of our face. It's just that we have a media that is unwilling to bring those things up. The Deshaun Watson thing is still playing out. We don't know all the evidence, but we do know that a grand jury heard the testimony of 9 people and returned a no bill. I mean, and then he gets $230 million from the Browns, and everybody's mad now because he's getting $230 million from the Browns. But look at the facts and look at the evidence, all of which is not out. I'm not saying I know everything about Deshaun Watson. I'm just saying that there's a pattern that I see with these cases, and it just happens to be a crime that is one of the hardest crimes to prove, one of the hardest crimes to verify. It's not bank fraud or car theft. So I'll just say that.
I've been on both sides of those. I happen to agree with what she's saying. The only problem with the Brett Kavanaugh thing is once it's out there, and it's a sexual allegation. And the problem is if you don't deal with it, then you're in a whole different ballgame. So once that's out there, that's a huge, huge issue. I don't believe that Judge Brown Jackson has any of those issues, but we'll find out what they actually decide to throw against the wall. We don't know.
But see, that's the point of their strategy. We threw it out there, and oh my goodness, like there's the win right there. So it's interesting.
Listen, I just wanted to let James know, Lauren, because you made a statement about getting $230 million from the Browns. When she said the Browns, she's talking about the Cleveland Browns, not Stacey Brown's family. I just want you to know, I'm not buying you a T-shirt, okay? I don't have $230 million to spend on a T-shirt for you.
I wish.
But in all seriousness, though, we talk about this, the importance of of the sentencings. We talk about deciding cases. Let's hear what Judge Jackson had to say about how she decides her cases.
Yeah.
Members of this committee, if I am confirmed, I commit to you that I will work productively to support and defend the Constitution and this grand experiment of American democracy that has endured over these past 246 years. I have been a judge for nearly a decade now, and I take that responsibility and my duty to be independent very seriously. I decide cases from a neutral posture. I evaluate the facts, and I interpret and apply the law to the facts of the case before me without fear or favor, consistent with my judicial oath. I know that my role as a judge is a limited one, that the Constitution empowers me only to decide cases and controversies that are properly presented. And I know that my judicial role is further constrained by careful adherence to precedent.
Oh man, that's interesting. And so it was interesting, I'm sure, for everybody to listen to Ted Cruz tell people that, oh, you're not supposed to set policy as a jurist, and then think about Dred Scott and Plessy v. Ferguson and all the cases that set policy when people were jurists. So it's amazing. It's amazing the double standards.
Yeah, welcome, Dr. Chavis. Dr. Benjamin Chavis is joining us, our president and CEO. Dr. Chavis, we are wrapping up here on what's beginning to be day 2 of the historic confirmation hearings of Judge Ketanji Brown Jackson.
Absolutely, and I want to thank all of our panelists this morning. It's been a great show, and I think that Judge Brown Jackson is going to do well. She did well yesterday, and no matter what they throw at her, we have full confidence that she'll be able to keep her proper decorum and respect as a judge. And I predict that she's definitely going to get confirmed, no matter what some of the right-wing people on the Judiciary Committee try to divert. One thing I've learned over the years, at the end of the day, once truth is out there, it's hard to camouflage it. And the truth is, she's not only the best qualified, but at this time, America needs her perspective on the Supreme Court of the United States. I think that's undeniable. And so, I'm optimistic. I'm not worried about any of the antics or the tactics to try to divert from her truth and to try to divert from the facts. So on behalf of the NMPA, we're going to continue to do what we do, put the news out there. And I think Lauren is right. I mean, look, the Black press has to have the courage to speak truth to power, no matter what the issue is.
Yeah, and real quick, and I'll ask this of each of our distinguished guests this morning, starting with you, Attorney Tarver, then James, and we can end with Lauren. The significance of Judge Brown Jackson having her family there, and what an example she is set for her children and even her husband. What's the significance, Attorney Tarver?
Well, it shows that she's well-rounded. It shows she has a background and she has supporters. Here's the problem here. Dr. Chavis made a good point. Perspective. Do you want a justice who has experience as a trial lawyer, experience as a public defender, experience in dealing with all of these things? Or do you want someone like an Amy Coney Barrett who's lived in academia all her life and doesn't understand the perspective of American life? That's what I think is going to be a huge point here.
James?
Yes, I think the family definitely made her look more authentic and made her look like a good family person in terms of her marriage as well as her friends and things. And I hope the senators do what they're supposed to do, which is advise and consent and ask good questions of the judge in terms of her temperament, in terms of what contribution she will bring to the court, and not all of this foolishness and nonsense about sex and all that type of stuff.
Yeah. And Lauren, before you respond, I want to ask you another question about you. How do folks find the Burke File? And when you find it, you got to check her out, because I love her intro. It's just amazing what Lauren has accomplished over her career. But how do people find the Burke File?
Well, all you need to do is go to the Twitter account, which is @LVBurke, and all the links are in the Twitter bio. That's the easiest way and most obvious way. Obviously, Burke File is on Apple Podcasts and all the places you find podcasts, but just going to my Twitter account does that.
Great.
I wish that Ketanji Jackson was more like Robert Tarver in terms of being a defense attorney. She was a defense attorney for a very short period of time. Okay. And I actually think she's a little bit more conservative, as I say, in the more Breyer tradition than in the Thurgood Marshall tradition. Nonetheless, she will likely be a jurist that is ruling to the left more than to the right. Seeing her family there, David Jackson, was very exciting. Obviously, he's a doctor over at Georgetown at MedStar. And, he's crying a lot during the hearing, so that was sort of sweet to see. I'm sure that we'll see a lot of commentary about the fact that she's married to a white dude. I really don't think that matters and don't care. But we have the Umar Johnsons and such out there making a deal about things like that. And it just, who you fall for is who you fall for a lot of times. But he seems like a sweet guy. And the other thing was Lisa Fairfax, her friend from Harvard Law and Harvard undergrad, who, by the way, is married to Justin Fairfax's brother, Roger Fairfax, who went to Harvard Law and is now the dean over at American University Law and was the dean over at George Washington Law. So there's all these Black Harvard graduates sitting out in the audience, and that's really cool to see. And what Lisa Fairfax said was really sweet from a longtime friend.
Well, the Democrats, the leaders there, Senator Schumer and others, hope to get this done before they break on April the 11th. And it would be really nice if they got it done during Women's History Month, right?
Absolutely. They need to look alive out there. You're seeing a lot of quiet Democrats. I think they were caught up in the historic moment. We'll see if they've got their war clothing out today. But the committee, as everybody knows, is headed by one of the oldest members of Congress, Pat Leahy. Pat Leahy and Feinstein are 81 and 88. So she's going to need some defenders on that side, because I think it's going to be a very interesting day. The Republicans, when they bring it, they bring it. And so it'll be interesting to see what happens.
Yeah, Leahy's been there, I think, since I was in elementary school. I remember him.
He's been there forever. But don't forget Dick Durbin. Dick Durbin has been a star in all of this. And he's really marshaled things together. So I expect he's going to be the strongest defender here.
Yeah. Well, we're going to continue. The Black Press of America, the NMPA, will continue to bring you up-to-the-minute details on what's going on. You can check out many of our member papers, and we're looking forward to having a lot of information posted at blackpressusa.com as well. But our member papers are following it. They're picking up stories from our newswire. So keep informed, and certainly let it be known. We'll have more on Judge Amy. I was going to say Judge Amy. That's your fault, James. Judge Ketanji Jackson tomorrow, and throughout the rest of the week, we will bring you some in-depth coverage like today. No better than Lauren Burke, Attorney Tarver, and James Wright. Thank you all for joining us. And Dr. Chavis, of course, is always a privilege to have the CEO with you, with us. So we'll see you tomorrow. Thanks again, guys.
That's going to be fun.